Right, good evening everybody. This is a meeting of the Council held in public. It's not a public meeting. There is no fire drill planned, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave by the exit nearest the large screen at the front of the room. Proceed down the fire exit to the courtyard. Once it's safe to return, councillors will receive a text message. Officers will also advise when it is safe to return to the meeting. We are recording this meeting this evening using our webcasting system. The webcast will be transmitted live and will also be available on the Council's website following the meeting. All mobile devices should be switched off or set to silent so that the meeting is not interrupted by ringtones. Okay. Apologies for absence. None? No apologies. Declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Confirmation of the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July. All those in favour, please show. One abstention. Thank you. Okay. Item 4, the Task and Finish Group Grass Cutting and Grounds Maintenance Contract. This is to receive a verbal update from the lead member, Councillor Westwick, of the Task and Finish Group on grass cutting, ground maintenance contract, detailing the work completed and the proposed actions for the future meetings before the final presentation in the autumn to the Commission. Councillor Westwick, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. So far, we have had 2 meetings. In our initial scope meeting, we focused on identifying the most important issues in the borough concerning maintenance and service delivery. As anticipated, a wide range of issues were discussed. A key point that emerged was just how terrible the borough currently is looking. Now, in my honest opinion, this is because of the decision made by the previous administration to cut back on the summer pruning. This reduction has had directly impacted the quality of services and has been a major contributor to the residents of our borough being ashamed and embarrassed of where they live. Moving on, in our first meeting, the topics we covered were what is being paid for and what is being completed by the company, detailing what is currently contracted and current service provisions. Also, what is the current communication to members and public? So, in a sense, that means where are they cutting, how can the public find out whereabouts they're cutting, and if they can't, can they be updated also? Detail on rectifications, defaults and financial penalties that could be potentially available if certain KPIs aren't met. Then we moved on to also KPIs and quality control. So that's the work of the inspecting officers with focus on litter picking and the quality of trimming. On our third meeting, on the 16th of September, we will be discussing the following. What is being done to stop pathways being blocked? I think we can safely say that's a massive priority across the borough. Is obviously the hedges and the bushes that are forcing residents to go into harm's way in roads. What is the proposed communication, once again, to the members and public? We have also invited a member of staff from ID Verdi, where we'll be able to ask them questions. So these sort of questions would be, is there anything they need from the council? Is there anything we can help with their recruitment? Obviously to maybe help with their calibre of workers that they have. Also from there as well, we will be talking to that specific person about the working procedures of the service. Also, another key point we will be speaking about is if it is raining and they're unable to cut the grass, instead of them pivoting to park and working on the maintenance and machinery, for actually them to go around the borough and de-weed in certain places or priority areas. And also we will be looking over what Essex County Council pay the council for, which land is Basildon, and which land is Essex County Council maintaining. We will then have our final meeting, and the report will be with the Overview and Scrutiny Commission on the 29th of October. I think I can speak for the Task and Finish group as well, and we want to thank so far the council officers who have helped with the Task and Finish group, and of course James Hendry for all of your professional help along the way. To close, the reason we are requesting the extension is to ensure that we can be as far as possibly for it to work. We aim to dot every I and cross every T. The Task and Finish group is committed to delivering the results that our residents can be proud of. By taking necessary time, we can ensure that the solutions we propose are both comprehensive and effective. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Westwick. I think it's very useful. Obviously, when you come back in October, we'll be looking to see if there's any recommendations following your work. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, given that you kicked off your opening statement with something that was blatantly false because the previous administration did not actually cut back on the summer prune, and if you check the records and the facts, you will find that's the case. And given that you opened with a clearly political narrative to begin with, how can we have any faith that you as the lead member of that Task and Finish group are actually doing the job of scrutinising and actually being open and transparent both with members and the public when you kicked off with just a political speech?
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. Do you wish to respond to that, Councillor Westwick?
Yes, please, Chair. So I understand what you are coming across as, Councillor Baggott. Unfortunately, my main thing that we will be focusing on in this group is the safety of the residents. They've been let down. They need a fresh set of eyes on the ground. My professional job is I am a grounds maintenance worker myself. I work up in some very prestigious projects up in London. So our aim, like I said, it's not political. It is about making sure the residents are safe.
Thank you. Any member of the committee wish to speak? I'll bring in Councillor Smith as a leader of a group then. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I better declare it first that I'm also an Essex County Councillor because some of the points Councillor Westwick made about weeds and the county is relevant to that. The summer prune was abolished under the previous Conservative administration. Last year, I spoke with an officer. I'm not going to name the officer. They said to me, please keep it to yourself because I don't want to lose my job. And the summer prune was axed. Now, normally each August, I go around my ward stroke division doing odds and jobs with a paintbrush to make the area look fresh. Last year, I was going around with a pair of pruners with Councillor Green when we was out dropping off the newsletter to make sure residents walking along a path weren't getting cut to pieces by blackberries. We put in that request for the Pride team. Remember where we are, we're not asking it to look like Chelsea Garden Flower Show. We want it so mum can go along with a buggy without getting sort of clawed or having to walk into the highway. And it was not a priority, not a priority, not a priority. Nag, 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 and me and Hazel would go out with a pair of shears, cut the stuff up, and just sort of put it at the base of the bushes, yeah? Because under common law, it would be theft to take it away. That's my understanding of that. But this year of the Pride teams, 2 weeks done, 2 weeks done. And we're not asking for petty, silly little jobs like, could it look a little bit tidier? It's, can the path be open up for pedestrians? And the answer is, give us 2 weeks. Absolutely brilliant. What a change of shop. I do think what your work needs to work on are the walkways across the estate. Myself and Councillor McGowan last year, because as the county member for Langdon Hills and Nevermain, I covered the Langdon Hills estate, which has got walkways where you can't park right next to it. And I was campaigning for the new bit coming to Nevermain where you're the county councillor, Councillor McGowan, Vange Hill Drive. And the same issue there. So I said to Councillor McGowan, do you want a gate crash with me to the highway surgery with the then Cabinet member Lee Scott? Yes, and it was about the weed spraying on the walkways. And as soon as we got there, Councillor Lee Scott, to his credit, said, I'm very sorry they've been missed off. They should be sprayed 3 times a year. And to his word, Councillor McGowan, they were sprayed. They were late this year spraying them. That was down to the rainy weather. They have been out. But I do think, Mr Chairman, that Councillor Westwick needs to have that conversation about our walkways because residents think it's Basildon Council's problem when it is the county's problem. And I think this is where Councillor Yacoub might need to look into it with this digital mapping. We can look up on the Essex County Council website what is theirs, but the public on Basildon Council's website can't. So if it is county, then you pull up your county members. If it is borough, then we're here to get it sorted. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Smith, can I just say this on this subject? I asked it to be on the agenda for the ONS Commission because from May onwards I was receiving complaints locally, as other members were, on the grass cutting or the lack of grass cutting, and to my knowledge there are some areas in Wickford have only had 2 cuts this year so far, and people have actually dated them with me. Now, why they've missed some, I do not know, but I think the important thing is that the Task and Finish group is looking at what's happened so far. I think the important part of the work is going to be looking at the future, because we need to hopefully have some good recommendations from you, how we act from 2026, when I think the contract is due for renewal, to ensure that what we get is better than it is today. Even if it's brilliant today, we'd want to even make it better still. So I think that's what we've got to work with. And can I congratulate you on the number of meetings you've got in so far? Well done. Anybody else wish to come in? Otherwise, the report is basically noting the verbal report. But thank you for your work, and the officers who've supported you as well. Thank you. Okay. We now move on to item 5, Area Committee Funding. Now, let me tell the story. As chairman of ONS, I received a call-in request from 3 members to look at the funding for area committees. Unfortunately, the call-in wasn't filled in correctly. It referred to the subject of setting up area committees, which was done at the full council on the 23rd of May, which made it an invalid call-in. But one of the arguments in the call-in was about the funding arrangements for the 2 funds, which I happen to agree with the points that were being made. So I asked to be put here tonight. We have a report here on how it's all sorted out and what the 2 funds are. But the point I would make, and the reason I wanted to discuss tonight, is there's £60,000, we'll talk about the full year, not the 8-month one, £60,000 a year for 6 area committees each, okay, on the Believe in Basildon Fund. On the Community Priority Fund, £10,000 per councillor on a proportionate basis based on the number of councillors. Now, the Believe in Basildon Fund, in my opinion, should also be proportionate by number of councillors, because not only is there 9 councillors in the Billericay and Wickford area committees, and 6 in each of the 4 other area committees, but also the 2 ones with 3 wards in are dealing with about approximately 9,000 additional electorate. So I'm going to start the ball rolling, because if proportionate, the 4 committees on the Believe in Basildon Fund with only 2 wards in would receive roughly £52,000 and not £60,000, and the ones with 9 councillors in would receive £75,000 instead of £60,000 on a proportionate basis on the number of councillors, exactly the same as the Community Priority Fund. And when we come to vote tonight, I will be moving the ONS to recommend to the relevant cabinet member that funding for both funds be proportionate to the number of councillors serving on each committee, because I think it's important that we do that. So that's the scenario, but I'll be interested to listen to views. Councillor Sargent did make approaches and wishes to speak tonight, so after members, I'll bring you in first, Councillor Sargent, if you still wish to speak. Members. Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I mean, I share a lot of your concerns on this one. I must admit, I've looked at it from the point of view sort of proportionally in terms of the number of electors within the relevant areas, and tried to look at it as sort of a per head spend basis, because that seems to me to be the sort of fairest and most equitable way of doing it. And if you look at the Billericay and the Wickford committees, they get about £3 a head. So you're talking about £90,000 across roughly 30,000 electors. And then if you're into the other wards, Pitsea, Basildon, Langdon, Wesley Heights, then it's much closer. In one case, it's over £4 a head. And that's where my concern is. I think that what we need to do is we need to get the two £90,000 wards boosted up. I wouldn't want to take anything away from the other four committees. That's not what I'm about. It's not what the Conservative Party is about. We want everyone to do better. So I think it's important that we raise the level. You know, I've had a look at it. I mean, if we were to increase the funding to, say, the minimum spend in one of the two ward committees, which is £3.79 in Wesley Heights, then the budget for Billericay would be about 113,000, and for Wickford about 108,000. If we raised it up to the same amount that's in Pitsea, we're looking at 123,000 or 117,000 for Wickford. These are not vast sums of money. I suspect perhaps the fairest and most equitable figure would be somewhere in the middle of those numbers, so that the Billericay and Wickford residents get a similar spend per head as the other wards within the borough. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I think my method was a bit simpler, but there we go. Councillor Baggott.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, I don't envy the officers that have had to put the work in to actually divide this out, because when you actually have a look at it, it doesn't matter what methodology you use, you're not going to have some people that are happy with any result. Personally, I don't think it should be based upon the amount of councillors, because this is about the public and it's about residents, so it shouldn't be about, because there's 3 councillors, that they get more money than an area where there's only 2 councillors that are representing them. It just doesn't seem right. What should be done is on need. And if we're going to do anything, it should be, and this is where I think we're going to struggle, until the area committees are established and until you start to get a flu-through of projects and things and an appetite from the public as to what it is they see their priorities as, we're talking about fighting over breadcrumbs for something that hasn't even manifested as an idea at this particular point. So I do wonder whether there is enough flexibility and scope that what we do is we wait until we start to see these projects coming forwards, and then the committee can say, well, we've got an area here which is clearly in need, it's got a real wealth of ideas. Maybe what we do is we give them the money to achieve those ideas. We've had no ideas coming from this particular area, therefore we can apportion the budget accordingly, because that would seem then to be fair and actually in tune with what the residents are saying to us, because ultimately this should be about the residents of the borough.
Councillor Brown.
Yes, I would like to echo that some portion of that comment. Actually, it seems a little perverse that places that are deprived with with low socio-economic IMD indexes of multiple deprivation, like Pitsea, for instance, should have their funding questioned in regard and increasing funding given to places like Billericay and Wickford, which are very prosperous areas of Basildon. And it seems as though this focus on per capita spend has completely divorced itself from the needs of the residents, in the sense that residents have different levels of deprivation across the borough, and to be blind to that just as a spend per capita seems to ingrain the deprivation and the inequalities that are spread across Basildon. So really, when Councillor Baggott focuses on the projects, I think what I've taken from it is that some areas will need more work than other areas. And just to say Billericay needs more money because they have more people is not to think about where the projects and the deprivation lie. Thank you.
Councillor Brown. Of course, both of those comments, yours and Councillor Baggott's, are actually challenging what was set up originally by the administration in where it operates. What I'm suggesting is purely changing part of that for fairness. in terms of distribution of the funds, because there may well be as many. One is for, if you need to look at the criteria for the two particular funds to establish what you want actually going to do as an area committee. When you've looked at those, I think you will see the different things you can and cannot do. So it doesn't necessarily always mean you're looking at socio-economic factors. You're looking at some things which would normally have been some infrastructure, adding items, adding benches, doing sorts of other things in the areas. The second one is for grants and different types of things, but each area committee can award a grant on a borough-wide basis as well, or more than one ward or more than one area committee basis. I think before we start trying to change the rules totally, which both of you are suggesting, that would need to go back and you'd virtually stop the area committees functioning from probably the beginning of October. So let's see where we go. Councillor Ansell, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be honest, I think that Councillor Barnes and Councillor Baggott make a valid point. I think there is some validity to what they're saying around looking at the apportionment of the funding. And I think Councillor Baggott's idea about potential carryovers at the end of the day isn't without merit either. However, I do have to agree also and more strongly with the point that Councillor Brown makes, in that I believe there is another consideration which I think is more important on this occasion. And that is, I think that proposal's been put forward around, say, a per head approach. And I know you've kind of just picked up on this point, Chairman, but it's still a point I'd like to make. I think that the proposal that seems to be coming forward around a per head doesn't take account of the socio-economic challenges that the certain areas across the borough faces. And again, I think I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Councillor Ferguson and administration for kind of spearheading the initiative around the area committees. And I believe what the committees are around is around civic pride, and particularly using an opportunity to engage people that might not necessarily engage in kind of civic activities. And I believe that need is probably stronger in certain areas in the borough where there are certain or stronger socio-economic considerations or challenges. So I wanted to say that I think there's some validity to what some of the members, the Conservative members and yourself, Mr. Chairman, have said, but on this occasion I believe that there's a stronger and more important consideration here. Thank you.
I'll just say this. I don't think you must get the idea that aren't any people with socio-economic problems in Wickford and probably in Billericay as well. There are in Wickford. You know, I deal with a few in my ward. I know other members do in their wards. So don't let's go down that road that Billericay and Wickford is definitely much better off. It may well be, but the clubs and the people who want grants perhaps in Wickford may be as important as those in Pitsea, Langdon Hills, Langdon or wherever. I think we should bear that in mind. From what's being said so far, it would appear that the funding arrangements which were agreed on the 18th of July by the Cabinet don't appear to meet the requirements at all of members, because even the way it's done, with every area committee getting £60,000 rather than being proportionate on the number of councillors, even that doesn't meet what you're arguing for. So all I'm saying, just think about what you're asking for, because it may well be you're almost saying, let's throw it all in, stop the area committees, and let's go back again and work out what they're going to do. That's what it appears to be. But don't let us go down that road unless you really want to go down that road. All right, anybody else? Councillor Sargent, I did promise you I'd let you. No, Councillor Sargent, I asked. Yeah. Councillor Sargent.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to begin by saying about the call-in, which you spoke of earlier. I must admit we do not agree with the decision that was given that the call-in was invalid, because you just mentioned the Cabinet report spoke about funding, and that is what we, the ward members of Crouch and Castleton and Crouch, brought in, was on the funding. Because
can I stop you there, Councillor Sargent? You must be factual. On the call-in front page, you called in the decision to form the area committees, and that decision was made on the 23rd of May by full council, and you cannot call in a full council decision. That's why it was ruled invalid. Perfectly reasonable. If I would have had allowed that, even if I agreed with some of the reasons for your call-in, even if I agreed with them, it would have left the door open for people to come in the future and say, well, I didn't put it on quite right, but you agreed that one from Councillor Sargent, you better agree my one. I wouldn't go down that road.
I can disagree if I want to, and I do, and I'll leave it there, Chairman. But I need to make that point. In relation to the funding, the actual call-ins that we did, even though it wasn't allowed, and I am pleased to be able to come here this evening and speak on this matter. We asked for, and which I will ask the committee to consider this evening, we asked that the community priority funds, that where each ward will receive £10,000, is earmarked to that ward to enable the ward members to decide where they wish to spend that money. And I'll end it there because that is what we asked for. The second was on the Believe in Basildon Fund, and particularly on reading this report this evening, it spoke about proportionality, equal proportionality over the borough. When you have mentioned yourself, it is not equally proportioned to the area committees over the borough, and it's been spoken this evening in relation to the actual ward figures. Well, both Billericay and Wickford and Crouch wards, they both have 30,000, practically 30,000 electorate, whereas the other wards are just under or on 20,000. So that will mean that those larger wards will receive disproportionate funding, and I think that's the point that we were trying to make, and I don't think that is reflected within the report. And for the past couple of days I have been trying to challenge those figures, and I was pleased to hear that you yourself, you did not agree with how the report was stating, and you more or less are saying what Alex and I and Stuart were saying as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In part, I will just say your comment about the Community Priority Fund isn't factual. The £10,000 per councillor isn't per member. That is just how the fund is made up. It's still down to the area committee of 9 members or 6 members, wherever it is, to make their minds up on how they spend that money. It's not for in one ward to say, well, there's 4 opposition members, so we spend ours differently to the other 4 opposition members. It's not like that. It isn't set up like that. Please read the criteria, which was pages 46 to 55 or 56 on the Cabinet agenda on the 18th of July. It's worth reading so you know what the criteria is. Criteria is from what you can actually do. Without knowing that, you really be careful what everyone's saying. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Did Councillor Baggett want to come in because he's a member?
I called you Councillor Smith.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I was just being polite to members of the committee.
No, you were trying to get Councillor Baggett to say something before you did.
Helpful going all but last because there were some interesting points. My colleague Councillor Brown talked about. Oh, Mike, Mr. Chair.
Sorry.
Areas of deprivation across the borough. It is a well-known fact when the previous alliance was in, and we've done a piece of work on it. If you wanted to live as long as you can in the borough, you lived in Billericay, where if you lived in parts of Vange and Pitsea, you would expect a low life expectancy. So investing in areas where there's issues, the previous Conservative government called it levelling up. When we try something to reach out to areas that need investment, that's seen as bad. Now, I need to give some context to this, and I spoke to you the weekend about it. Each of us county councillors get £5 grand to spend, And each year we get asked so many potholes, so many lengths of pavement, depending on what they do. Now, the argument put across by members of the opposition is that it's all supposed to be fair and come by you. Now, my division of Wesley Heights has 17,000 more electors than the average number of electors, and I've got to lose 2 polling districts next May. But I still get the same number of potholes, the same area funding, where divisions north of the 127 are greatly got less population. So Wickford has now got to take a fifth of the electors of Pitsea South East to bring the Wickford divisions up. And the same with Bursted. Now, those county members are getting the same money, the same pothole nominations, and you don't hear me complain. Because at the end of the day, it's how it works, and you make that argument at a boundary review and it's dealt with. But that's already there, and that's already happening. Now, I think this is quite fair, to be fair, Mr. Chairman, because when you're in administration, traditionally has always been this £850,000 a year members' investment scheme, which is basically the administration's pot of money. But over very recent years, that's just dwindled away because of austerity and trying to keep services running, and more recently, screw-ups of the bins. So this administration, which I'm a part of as the Cabinet Member for Housing, is saying we're not going to have any arguments north-south. The Billericay wards, they've got 60 grand plus 10 grand per ward, and the same with the Wickford ones. Now, as an administration, we could say, well, you're not part of the administration. You get done to yourselves as you've done to us. And to put that into context, Mr. Chairman, Maplesford Sweep, the residents there are having to use a damaged Royal Mail postbox pouch to put dog waste in, because when I asked for £300 last year to install a dog bin, there was no money. No.
Councillor Smith, I'm going to... Funding for the area committees we're talking about now. That's what we're talking about. I don't wish to know too much about what the county council do and how you spend the county council's money. That's up to you as a county councillor, Councillor McGovern as a county councillor, and I'm sure they appreciate the funding from the county council to enable them to do that. So let's stick to what we're talking about now, which is, you know, and I'll be honest, tonight I'm not really interested in how much was spent last year by Councillor Baggett's administration, what they spent and how they spent it in your particular ward or whatever. What I want to do is try and get area committees up and running, because I think they're the most useful thing we can have. And Wickford actually wants one. He actually wants one. All I'm asking, because it had been put to me, was about the funding being proportionate. And that's what I made a recommendation at the beginning. That's what I was hoping we were discussing. Other members, Councillor Baggett, Councillor Brown and Councillor Ansell, have spoken to that in saying they disagree, and they put an alternative, not a proposal, but a way of thinking about things. So can we stick to that, please? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'd finish. One example of where the rules are not strictly adhered to, and when people try and pull us up for being fair, we get pulled up on. That's double standards. But I was just going to wrap up on this final point, 2 final points. As I chair the Wesley Heights Area Committee, it's been alluded by some members, oh, it's going to be pet projects. I know the word pet project wasn't used, but there was that illusion. I asked in the alternative budget to put in 32 grand to put in a new path in Clay Hill Lane to stop a pedestrian being run over because there is no space. The opposition, the administration at the time, weren't giving sweeties to the opposition, so that could not happen. The bill's gone up a little bit by 8 grand, so the first thing that area committee will be working on, the officers have priced it up. I thank Grant Taylor and James Hendry and his team. 42 grand it's going to cost thereabouts to put in a proper path to stop someone getting run over, and other people would like to take money out of the Wesley Heights Area Committee, stick it north of the 127, and it might take me 2 financial years to potentially save a life in winter. And one final thing, last year I asked, 22nd of March 2023, I have it here as evidence because Scrutiny does like a bit of evidence, it's from Owen Sparks, asked how much some mock Victorian LED lamp posts were for Billericay High Street, £62,000. I know the Conservative members want to take money from my constituents. Ridiculous.
Councillor Baggett.
Well, after that bombshell, then I should point out that those Victorian lampposts have nothing to do with the council. My understanding is that they came from a completely different source and weren't funded by Basden Council. But I stand to be corrected by Mr Sparks if he wants to. I mean, you alluded to it, Chairman, and it's quite clear that this whole thing, constitutionally and governance-wise, is a bit of a train wreck. You know, you said yourself to Councillor Sargent that the detail was in the Cabinet report on the 18th of July. So all the detail is in a report on the 18th of July for a decision that was made in June at full council. And this is the lesson. You can't going to full council, shoehorning an idea in at the last minute, you know, without any sort of costings, any sort of funding, any sort of idea how it's going to pan out, any sort of debate, and then not expect to have people questioning it further down the road. So if the detail was in a Cabinet report on the 18th of July, maybe the sensible thing would have been to do at full council was to announce the intention of having area committees and get the approval of council to do that, subject to the final detail being hammered out by scrutiny or some other process. Because now here we are, we've had a call-in, which I believe was quite right. The decision, what should have been called in is why this area committee was set up without any form of proper debate, and we went straight to full council with members putting their hand up, not understanding the ramifications or the costings as to what they were going to be getting. So that's where the calling maybe should have been, but that's not for me. And what we need to do is now unpick it and get something sorted out. So your suggestion, which I'm inclined to support, that we actually defer this now and actually get it looked at properly and set it up, you would have my support. So if you want to move that, and I will certainly second it for you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Baggett. No, I didn't move that at all. What I moved was that we'd recommend to the relevant cabinet member the funding for both funds be proportionate to the number of councillors serving on each committee. The commission may disagree with that, but that's the recommendation I was making from the chair. Now, if that falls, without anything else on the table, it will go back to what it is now in the report. Councillor Callaghan.
Thank you, Chairman, and can I begin by thanking Councillor Baggett for being true to form. If we followed that logic that he's just described, nothing would ever happen on this council, and I think we've just discovered why nothing did happen on this council when he led it. He described a process that should have happened, that in fact did happen. So we went to full council announcing an intention to create area committees, and then we took a report to cabinet to iron out the detail, and then his members messed up a form. Right? That's essentially why we are in the position that we're in. If they had not have messed up the form, then they would have been able to call this in properly. That is not a reflection on you, Mr. Chairman. It's not a reflection on this committee. It's not a reflection on the administration. It's a reflection on the Conservative group's inability to call in a decision. And that is why we are where we are. Okay? I know how to complete a form, Councillor, yes. And clearly you do not. What we haven't discussed at all here this evening is the policy. So to be really clear, the policy of the administration has never been about proportionality. We have never said at any point that this is about proportionality. We have never said in any of our committees or in the cabinet that that's what it was about. This was about treating all of the areas with equal importance. Okay, and that is why we took the number, £500,000, and divided it by 6. That's the methodology. That's why we've ended up where we've ended up when you take out the £3,000 per ward in the equation. And it is about promoting unity across the borough, because that has not happened. Councillor Smith talked about the legacy in the budget of member investments, which had ended up being money for the marginals or money for pet projects. I was very clear, coming back as Cabinet Member for Finance, that we were not going to have that free-for-all every February of members arguing for 10 grand here and 15 grand there, but instead we would treat every single town and every single part of the borough fairly, with an area committee that was able to get access to funding and to be able to councillors to get off their backsides, do a job, represent their residents, come forward and get things moving in the right direction. And what we're hearing tonight, and I have to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what the Tory argument is tonight. It's changed 4 times in 3 contributions, which is some going. But this never happened previously. So it is a new invention that we have brought to council. And I would just say, be careful what you wish for in this. Because when I look at my area in St Martin's has not benefited over the last 20 years from the member investment portfolio. It didn't get money for the marginals. It was never a priority area for Conservative administrations. So it got left behind. But what they won't say tonight is they won't say the words parish or town councils. And there's a reason for that. Because parish and town councils have incredibly large sums of money. Now, I've been clear in the guidance that has accompanied this, that in areas where there are parish and town councils, the area committees are not to spend money duplicating work. But what it does mean by implication is that in areas where there are not town councils, those area committees have to make that money work harder. It has to go further. They will have to spend money on things that area and town and parish councils would otherwise have been spending money on. So I could look at this through the prism of, why don't I start reducing the amount of money in area committees where there are towns and parish councils and lobbing more of that money into the areas where there aren't, so that we get equity all across the borough. Now, we have a £1.6 million black hole that we've inherited from the previous administration that we are now having to find savings for. And that is going to be an incredible task that we're going to have to look at. Now, if I had known that the Conservatives had lost control of the council's budget to the tune of £1.6 million 6 weeks ago, I may well be sitting here now saying perhaps we will look at the amount of money going to each area committee, and perhaps we will have to reflect on areas where there are town and parish councils. So I would just be really careful in terms of going down the route of saying that we need to start giving more money to some areas where there is already a large pot of money that exists to do a lot of work that the other area committees are going to have to use this money to look at as well. And I mean, you've made the point, Chairman. Let's get these things up and running. Let's get them moving. Let's test the concept. Let's test the idea. Let's see whether or not it's the right sum of money, whether there needs to be more, whether there could be less. Let's test the concept and the idea of it. I committed the whole way through, including at full council and again at Cabinet, that I will bring an annual review to this ahead of the budget in February, and that I will be more than willing to look at what the success is. As things stand at the moment, everyone just wants to moan and argue that they haven't got enough money. I'm hearing one argument that says we should put even more money into it, but we have a £1.6 million black hole that you guys have left us, so that makes that challenging. I accept you weren't here, Councillor Barnes, at the time. Perhaps if you were, your colleagues wouldn't have been so stupid. But nonetheless, we are where we are. But even still, I just think there needs to be a sense of realism in this. Either we get on with it, right? Proportionality has never been the policy. Right? I've never said it was. It was a simple divide by 6 across £500,000, right? That's why we are where we are. So if we want to start changing and fiddling, I'd be more than happy to do it, but I would then look at what the town and parish councils can offer in that sum as well.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. I will just add that, of course, proportionality is mentioned in the report because one of the funds is proportionate, and I was just asking that they both be proportionate. I agree with some of what you say. I think it's important the area committees are up and running. Before I bring Councillor Baggott in, who wishes to respond, I think it's worth noting that Councillor Sargent is interested and obviously thinks the area committee in Whitford should have more funding. I assume that Councillor Myers agrees with her because he supported the call-in along with Councillor Allen. I'm assuming Councillor Barnes and Councillor Baggott want the area committees in Billericay. Yet, you've done a leaflet. Basildon Council has decided to reintroduce area committees, one for each part of the borough. There will be minimal budgets and powers. Conservatives say this is an unnecessary layer of bureaucracy. So I'm assuming that the Wickford one, I might have to accept. We only get £60,000 because it'll only be spent in a certain area. Because you don't agree with the area committees, Councillor Sargent, Councillor Myers. I'm not sure about Councillor Baggott and Councillor Barnes because this was a Wickford leaflet. So it appears. Right. Now, Councillor, I'm going to have to withdraw my recommendation now because Councillor Sargent is now agreeing with Councillor Callaghan saying we've got a parish council. We've got a parish council. So I'm assuming yours, Councillor Sargent.
Yes, Chairman. Sorry.
Just button it a little bit, please. Thank you. You're agreeing now with Councillor Callaghan on the basis that the parish council in Note Bridge, which I think you are the clerk and chairman, can actually carry out the work. No, if that's how you wish to continue, but don't put leaflets out like that and then come begging for more money. That's all I'm saying. Okay, I've got nothing. No, Councillor Smith. I'm going to call Councillor Baggott because I promised him next. You've spoken 3 times, and that's enough tonight. Okay, Councillor Baggott.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, I've listened to the snake oil peddler's snake oil. So I just want to ask a question to officers, if I can. And Mr. Sparks, can you confirm? Did the administration lose control of the budget, leaving a 1.6 million black hole, or did professional officers and the administration work together in order to actually plug a budget deficit which has been in place for over 10 years and we've been working to minimise over that period of time? Which of those is factually correct?
Mr. Sparks.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we set a balanced budget over always. And obviously we had a budget gap that we need to address going forward. We've always set a budget. Although we have a gap, we know we need to address going forward.
Thank you. So there wasn't any loss by the administration of control or management of the finances?
Mr. Sparks, you wish to respond to that?
I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to respond to, but we've always set a balanced budget as appropriate, and we had an MTS forecast that all members have contributed towards.
Thank you.
Councillor Callaghan, I know you had your hand up to respond to that. Then I'm going to call Councillor Ferguson in as the cabinet member responsible for the area committees.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So it's not appropriate for an officer to respond to a political comment, but the facts are that in February the council set a budget and it is now on course to overspend by £1.6 million. The budget that was set would not have been balanced. So Councillor Baggott and his administration left a £1.6 million black hole that this council is now having to address. That is a fact. It is on an out-term report that is coming to the Resources Committee tomorrow, and it went to Cabinet, and it will also be going to full council so that we can make sure that the public are fully aware of the economic inheritance that this administration has had from the Tories before us.
Thank you, Councillor Callaghan. Councillor Ferguson, I'm going to bring you in. I'm still going to put the recommendation I made to the vote because I think members should realise I made a recommendation from the chair and I think we should vote on it in a moment. Now, Councillor Ferguson is going to, in effect, respond on behalf, as he's the cabinet member responsible for area committees.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your words in support of the area committees. And I want to take it back to what the purpose of the area committees has been able to be set up to be able to do, which is to empower local councillors to be able to make decisions that affect their wards and be able to make a real difference to the lives of residents that they seek to serve and they have been elected to serve. Whether you're in administration or opposition, you have an opportunity to be able to represent your residents. You have a budget that you're able to be able to access, that you're able then to be able to spend money. The purpose of the area committees has been set up in completely transparent with being able to have in-public meetings, meetings being held in public so that residents across the borough can be able to tune in, be able to see what decisions their councillors are making and be able to make representations to those committees if they so seek and want the opportunity to be able to do. I also want to be able to make the real point and be very, very clear that this administration has approached this in a completely open and transparent way, being able to involve all the area committee chairs in being able to shape the area committees. And it really takes me back to the first ever meeting that I have attended of this council in 2018. There was a chair of that committee that said that all members of this council should be able to share their views, that there is no monopoly on good ideas across this borough. That person was the then leader of the council, the leader of the opposition, who is now the very same leader of the opposition that is saying we should do nothing and have no policy to be able to progress this. I also take myself back a few years ago to when I was leader of the opposition. I called for no fewer than 7 cross-party working groups that had no funding attached to them, that just sought the opportunity for opposition members to be able to shape policies that were being decided by this council. Again, the very same leader of the council, now leader of the opposition, is the very same person that rejected every single one of those 7 cross-party working groups that wouldn't have costed this council a penny. So actually, what this administration have done, the very first decision that we made at the AGM was to be able to bring in the area committees. The next decision that we were able to make at Cabinet was to be able to bring forward funding for each member, regardless of which political party you're a member of, to be actually able to make decisions that affect wards across the borough. And from what I've heard tonight is that they don't want that it's very much a do-nothing policy from the opposition that we are seeing. In fact, I also want to be able to make the point that since he is taking the SRA, he is the chair of the Billericay Area Committee, and we also have other chairs of area committees that are here with us tonight. I also want to be able to talk about the decision-making process. So the decision to create the area committees was made at full council. We then had a period of time until the 18th of July to be able to set up the principles, the funding pots, and I want to be able to thank the leader and cabinet member for finance for being able to go away, work with officers for being able to actually access the money for ward members to be able to carry this out. But we had that period of time where committee chairs were involved in the decision. On the 17th of July, I held a meeting with all of the area committee chairs, which was attended by the leader of the opposition, talking around the funding pots that were being allocated to each of the area committees. Not a single question was about proportionality. Not a single question. We then had the report that came to Cabinet on the 18th of July, the very same report that all 42 members across the borough, all 42 members of this council, had the opportunity to read. Not a single question by the leader of the opposition about proportionality. In fact, the comments that he made, and I want to thank him for his support at the meeting of the 18th of July. He was very supportive of the area committees. And tonight, he's clearly gone back to the Conservative group. They've clearly had a discussion and disagree with the decisions that he made, disagree with his support of the area committees, and has now had to come back and say, actually, it's not something that we want to do and wouldn't be able to progress with. And then we see the leaflet that is being delivered in Wickford that is criticising this administration, empowering Wickford members, empowering members that are going to be able to make decisions that affect their lives of residents, criticising giving Conservative councillors money to spend in their wards. Absolute disgraceful. And the worst thing about that leaflet, and the absolute irony of that leaflet, is the idea that it's called In Touch.
Thank you, Councillor Ferguson. In the point you made about 42 members not reading it, I read it, and I'm guilty as Councillor Baggott. I was at the Cabinet meeting. I missed it on the proportionality. I wished I hadn't missed it. I made a mistake as well. Because I do consider it should be proportionate. Because the area committees, as I see it, are not just about funding and giving out grants. I would like the area committees, and the leader knows this because I've already mentioned it to him, I'd like to see the area committees from next year have responsibility perhaps for the pride teams in their area, looking at the grass cutting, some of the other things. Not planning, not the regulatory committees, but some of the other things this council does. It might well be that where there are town councils and parish councils, you do it in liaison with them perhaps, but not taking over and funding them to do it. So they are areas. So I'm as guilty as Councillor Baggott on that one, but I actually believe area committees have a future, and I want them to continue, I want them to get started. So that's where I'm from. So to move matters on, Councillor Baggott, last one.
Thank you. I just want to get my bucket of disappointment out. I mean, I'm disappointed with the way this meeting has panned out so far. I think it's shocking in a way that here we've got a scrutiny meeting that clearly an administration which has got I know it's not a majority administration, and they're not really in administration, they're propped up by the independents, but they're so worried that they've had to come here en masse as a cabinet to actually spend a lot of their speeches making personal attacks, not actually covering the subject, but making personal attacks on individuals. I mean, I can take it, I don't mind, but I just think it's a waste of this committee's time listening to the leader of the council and his cronies standing up
Sorry,
and actually
Mr. Chairman, that's an attack on a member. I didn't call him a
other
crony.
members. It's unedifying, and I'm even more disappointed with Councillor Ferguson because...
Councillor Bagot, just for a moment. Councillor Smith, he didn't interrupt you, don't interrupt him. No, listen to me.
Right to call members of this council cronies or disparaging comments like that.
I'm sure you're...
We've had a civilised conversation tonight, and he's old habit of insulting people.
Councillor Smith, when you phoned me the weekend, you told me I'm going to come along and disrupt your meeting. You actually told me that. So please don't do it. Councillor Bagot, please continue.
Mr. Chairman, if you're going to quote the whole thing. I said if they make up all this rubbish about taking money from Basil, I will disrupt their lives with truth. Quote the whole or don't quote at all.
Thank you, Chairman, and that just sort of sums up my point about that element of disappointment. I'm also disappointed with Councillor Ferguson because if he'd actually listened or not been preconceived in his comments when he went on his little tirade, I'm actually for the area committees. I've not said that I'm not. I've actually not made any comment about proportionality. The comment that I made was that I felt that the call-in process and the making the call-in invalid was more a governance and the way that this was shoehorned into the council meeting as opposed to doing things properly. And if his administration is all about getting things done by actually just riding roughshod over constitutions and governance and everything else, then we'll see where the crows come to roost later. But for the record, I actually think the area committees are a reasonable idea. I think that they do give a level of engagement to the public. When I had the meeting with Councillor Ferguson and other members, I was supportive of it, and I stick by that. I've never ever said it should be proportional. I was making the point that, given that it's been raised at this committee, at scrutiny, and the chairman knows this is a scrutiny committee meeting, not a cabinet meeting, and it's quite right that we should be able to scrutinise an error and opinion. And my opinion, as it was the same as Councillor Brown's, that if we were going to consider any tweaking, it should be maybe based upon projects as opposed to just trying to argue the toss over proportionality or how we're divvying up breadcrumbs.
Thank you, Councillor Bagot. I'm going to draw that to a close now. It would appear that there's disagreement amongst the Commission, totally. I thought it was appropriate that the ONS Commission should actually look at this. I don't feel guilty for bringing it here. I think it's important that we discuss it. Now, I'm still going to move that we recommend the relevant Cabinet member that the funding for both funds be proportionate to the number of councillors serving on each committee, because I think that is the best option at the moment, other than what members were putting forward as changing the whole rules for how you fund it, basing it on socio-economic grounds, which is a total different argument. So therefore the choice is the recommendation or you vote against, and it's the status quo. It's quite simple. Okay? No, I'm taking a vote. Councillor Smith, will you please...
Multiple sclerosis, which is defended in the Equalities Act of 2010, he is actually had a toilet break and you're taking a vote when someone who has a disability, right, if you want to see medical records, he will give them to you. He's back in the chamber in a moment. I know you've not let him speak, you've refused me speaking, but he's allowed
No,
to have a toilet break.
Councillor Smith, I've let you speak on numerous occasions. You're not a member of the committee. I've tried to bring you in when you put your hand up. I know you're here as a leader of a group, but be fair, And I think that you've had a fair say tonight on matters, not only on what's been on the agenda, but on county council matters and other things. I've tried to be fair with the members who wish to speak. I give them my point of view. I don't... Yeah, let me finish. Let me finish, please. You know, I mean, you interrupt the whole damn time. Please don't do it. I'm not taking a vote at the moment. At the point in time, I was at the point in time when you started talking again. when you started talking again, I was reading out what we were going to vote on. I wasn't asking anybody to put their hands up at that point in time. So please listen more clearly. Thank you. Right now, I am going to take a vote on the recommendation to the relevant Cabinet member that the funding for both funds be proportionate to the number of councillors serving on each committee. Those in favour, please show. There's one. It's me. Okay. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Thank you. And no, the item's finished.
And I just wanted to help you, if I can, to remind you, we did agree at the previous scrutiny committee that this whole area committee issue is going to be reviewed after 6 months anyway.
It's on the work
so
programme.
that gives you the ability
it's
to,
on the work
to change
programme for next March. If you look at the work programme, it's on there for March. Okay. Right. We'll move on to a less contentious item. Recycling bags. Now, let me just, I'm assuming that members of the Commission have all read James Hendry's report. Okay? You've all read it. Now, I asked for this to come on here because there was much public discussion on these refuse sacks, and at the time when they were distributed and people were having problems with them, there was various comments being made that the wrong ones had been ordered and that new ones will they'd be bought to replace them. Now, all I'll say is, having read Mr. Hendry's report, that doesn't show up in that report at all, as I see it, unless I've missed something, James. It doesn't show up that the wrong ones were ordered. It does show up that there appear to be 2 procurement processes. Now, whether that's where the confusion has arisen, I don't know. Perhaps you'd like to explain.
Thank you, Chairman. So, obviously with the caveat that there is a live and public consultation. Sure.
Back on that, I should have made that point, thank you. Bearing in mind there's a consultation taking place on the way we collect waste. The discussion tonight is purely about these bags and how good they are, how they may not be, and whether they need replacing, whatever, but not about the consultation or the future, because we are not going to disrupt that consultation which is going ahead at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So well put, and obviously as I hope members of the Commission will understand, that with a live and valid public consultation underway at the moment, we need to be careful to not jeopardise any of the outcomes or results of that. I'd also draw members' attention to the fact that there is a live and valid contract in place with the provider of the reusable bags, and as such we wouldn't want to do anything to prejudice the relationship that we have with them, contractual and otherwise. So I think that that's a good grounding for us to start the conversation tonight. And obviously, adjacent to the report, there was a trial sack which was used in the initial trial, which is referred to within the report, and there was 2 further procurements for both to provide the wider sacks for the rollout of the service across the borough. So one of those was a failed procurement, the second one was a successful procurement.
Councillor Brown, first of all.
Yes, you've alluded to my question. I have 2 questions for Mr. Hendry. The first is your point exactly. We were all under in fact, the previous the previous person responsible, the cabinet member responsible, Councillor Blake, apologised to us and said yes, he was mea culpa aware that the wrong sacks had been ordered. That's in the public domain. So I would expect that to appear somewhere in this report, but it doesn't appear anywhere in the report. And I can't imagine that whoever that you are surprised that we're now asking about that specific thing. So I mean, it's quite obvious. It's the elephant in the room, but it's not mentioned at all in this report, which I just seems very odd. And I know that you got the live consultation, and I know that you got a current contract, but neither of those seem to exculpate whoever wrote this from a duty to at least address or at least state the reasons why they can't mention or deal with it because of the consultation or the contract. The second question that I have, So I'd like to know what happened with those sacks, and because it seems like a lot of money. The second question is around why a health impact assessment wasn't done, given that recycling bins were going to, black sacks are going to be moving to a 14-day cycle. Surely it would be prima facie the case that some sort of health impacts would arise from litter, from vermin, from the sacks being used, being as I think Councillor Smith calls them pathogen bags. So it seems prima facie, it seems obvious, it seems like it should have been considered that some sort of health impact assessment needs to be done. So I know that a health impact assessment doesn't need to be done all the time, like ordering paper clips, but it seems to me that this is clearly one of those cases where health and impact comes to mind, especially when it is to do with recyclables, with refuse. It's why councils were set up in the first place, was because people were living in public health hell. so councils were set up to. So those are my two questions. Why didn't you deal with the elephant in the room, and why did it not come to the council's attention to do a public health assessment? Thank you very much.
Mr. Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your questions, Councillor Brown. So what the report has in front of you is a timeline of the actions which took place around the procurement, and the mea culpa part isn't as dramatic or as exciting as that. There is with any sort of procurement activity, there is a specification. The public contract regulations require us to draft something that, unless there is a particularly good reason for it, you wouldn't be able to direct award that. There wasn't a reason to direct award this, so therefore you're looking at ways to engage with the market, and this is something which is, I'm not a procurement expert, but my understanding in procurement is that we would draft the specification, we would find a route to market, whether to go out to general market or through a framework. The decision on the successful procurement was to go through a framework for expediency. Within that procurement framework, there are pre-registered suppliers who have pre-registered equipment that they can provide through that. One of the things that you can call off through that framework was reusable bags. Under the PCR regulations, the public contract regs, we would need to perform a fair and open tender, which was performed. The specification was put out there to the market to provide a container, and the order for that container was fulfilled by a supplier on the framework who had passed all of the procurement requirements to get there. So it's not, there is no kind of, there's nothing really exciting behind that. There is some legislative and some procedural rules that councils have to adhere to make sure we get value for money when we are procuring things from the market. So hopefully that's not, that gives you the answer. It's not the answer you're looking for, I imagine, but that is the truth of the matter. So the second part of your question was around health impact assessments. A full equalities impact assessment was completed alongside the rollout of the decision to make the changes to the service, and obviously subsequently to any further decision changes, a further equalities impact assessment would be made. I'm not personally aware of any local authorities undertaking a formal health impact assessment alongside their waste and recycling collection changes. That is a question I've asked of colleagues up and down the country. I'm not aware of that taking place, but in addition to the waste service changes was a waste policy which was adopted by the council. The first time that we brought together all of our rules and the way in which we operate as a waste collection authority. That went through a due process and engagement with community groups, with our equality and diversion teams and some of the community groups that we work with. And that report, that policy talks about things like clinical and offensive waste that are produced within the home. So those who do have additional needs in that space. And again, I imagine that policy will be, there's already a recommendation in place from July's Cabinet to review that policy prior to considering the results of the current and live consultation. So again, it's a bit procedural and it talks about some of the legislative guidance that local authorities have to operate in, but the truth is in the report there.
Thank you, Mr. Hendry. Can I just question one thing on the report before I bring Councillor Brown and Councillor Reid in? Can you, I find it difficult because there's mention there of in a Cabinet decision in March 2023 following a competitive tender exercise, the value for the reusable sacks contract was awarded under an ODR with consultation of the relevant cabinet member. And then following the procurement, you'd already decided then on the type it was going to be after the consultation you'd had with Note Bridge. And then when you turn over, there was a further procurement activity following the cabinet meeting and another ODR with the relevant cabinet member on the 31st of May 2023. And then there was a decision to award the contract, and the purchase order was raised on the 12th of July. Were all of that with the one contract supplier, the one we're using?
Thank you, Chairman. So I think that the first procurement activity, so there was let's get this clear, there are 3 areas to purchase the sacks here that we talk about. There is the trial, the Note Bridge trial, which was done under ODR threshold. That was done on 3 quotes and being able to get the sacks in time for the trial. There was a second one, which was I forget the route to market, but that was done on a fair and open tender activity. Was the first one under framework as well?
It was, but it failed. Yeah.
First one was under framework. Yeah. It failed. So the procurement was failed and we weren't able to award the contract at that point, which is why the procurement was needed to be run again, and that time it was successfully completed. So the first one, regardless of, we didn't get to the point of awarding the contract because the procurement activity failed.
Okay, what I'm trying to get from you is on this procurement exercise at different stages and the contractual arrangements at different times, were all of those contracts based on the 2 bags which we are currently using? Was there ever any contracts at all with any other choice of bag?
No, so what happens, Chairman, when we put the specification together through a framework is that goes out to all the providers who can provide that type of bag on the framework. So they would all come back to us and say, we can provide that type of bag to you. Here are our prices, here are our lead times, these are our quality submissions around that based on the splits that you see within the report. So all of the providers on that framework would have been able to, I think they all bid for it, didn't they? All the people who were on that framework for that type of container were able to bid for that container. To meet the specification.
Okay, the reason I'm asking, because I'm still not really clear, because I do know, I want to bring Councillor Baggett in, because he did actually attend a meeting at Wickford Town Council where he reiterated what Councillor Brown has said, was said by the previous cabinet member, that the wrong ones were ordered and another one would be brought in to replace them. So what I'm trying to ascertain is, where did that come from? Where did that come from? Because Joe Public out there is actually a little bit disappointed in the quality of our way we collect our recycling stuff. I mean, I had complaints on Monday in Wickford, which happens most Mondays when they collect, of litter down the streets, because it's difficult tipping the bags into a black bin where someone's wheeling along to try and do it quickly. Some goes in, some misses, and there's no one walking behind picking the stuff up afterwards. So we need to get it right. I don't want to go to the future what's going on here, but the one question I will ask Mr Hendry, because he mentions about the contractual arrangements are ongoing, yes, with the supplier. Could have current contractual arrangements. I'll just ask the question, when does that current contract with the supplier of the bags we use at the moment, when does that end?
Thank you, Chairman. So the trial sack, and again, I won't stray into the realms of any commercial sensitivity around that, but it was around 7 times the cost of the purchase sack through a full procurement process. So that's what we're talking about here. That's the difference between what was trialled and what was procured through a competitive procurement. So the sack that was used on trial had proprietary technology that could only be provided by one supplier. There was no reason to direct award that. We would need to go through the framework, and the specification allowed for that competitive tender to take place. A reported increase in deposited litter was something that was highlighted from feedback from the trial, and that was noted prior to the decision to expand the trial into a collection service at curbside.
Councillor Baggott, then Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chairman. I will take it slowly to walk people through, because I think the point you've raised is a fair one. And when I read this report, I did notice that it's what's reading between the lines in some of the report. Now, I also understand that there are the commercial considerations and the ongoing consultation, but everything I'm about to say is not a secret and has been elucidated either in public meetings or at previous cabinet meetings and has been webcast, and therefore I should be fairly safe in what I'm saying. However, if I do stray to the point where officers or legal feel that the goalpost has shifted to the point that I couldn't say it, then just tell me to shut up or shoot me. Because what happened was that after the trial, there was a bag that was brought to members to actually have a look at as the preferred option for the bag that was going to be used. And it was a pretty good bag. So that was what was going to be rolled out. Unfortunately, when the procurement process was gone through, and my understanding is it was a junior officer, the paperwork that is legislative required was actually filed 24 hours too late. And therefore the view of the officers were that that put the council at risk from challenge from some of the other tenderers that could actually then appeal any decision. And the only right thing to do under the procurement process was to go back to re-procure because of that. I believe in a culture where you don't blame people for making mistakes. If you haven't made a mistake, you haven't made anything, you know. So therefore, we took the view, and you can laugh, but you know, it's about actually dealing with staff appropriately and not bullying them, Councillor McGurran. You know, so what you do is you actually have a culture where people, if they do make a mistake, are able to say, this is a mistake that's been made, let's deal with it, as opposed to hiding it and then, you know, digging further and creating further problems for an administration or a council. So the procurement had to be re-procured. There was a concern by officers, and I wasn't privy to these particular conversations, but there was a thinking that they needed to get this rolled out within a certain time frame in order to actually generate the amount of income that was projected from the increase in recycler. And therefore they set a timeline for wanting to complete the procurement, which is what led it to actually completing in November, which was one of the worst times that we could have actually rolled out a whole new waste strategy. But when they went to procurement, the original bag that had been looked at, which Mr Henry has quite rightly said, was proprietary only, and for whatever reason they were no longer in the world of wanting to supply that sack to Basildon Council. I don't know the reason why they didn't want to. I don't know if there was a supply issue from their point of view or what the issue was, but it was no longer an option. So officers then went for the next best option, as you'd expect officers to do under delegated authority, and they found the next best option as the bags that were then chosen under the procurement framework. It's just unfortunate that those bags turn out to be balloons rather than bags. And that is the process that was gone through for the procurement of the sacks. So quite rightfully, what Councillor Blake didn't say mea culpa. What he said was that he was disappointed, having seen the bags, that they were quite clearly not fit for purpose. And there's nobody in God's earth that can see bags floating around on the breeze and say these bags are a bloody good idea, because they're not. And therefore, that is the process we were at, Mr Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. I'll make the point here, though, quite seriously. You've directed your anger at, you said, a junior employee. Now, let me finish, please. Let me finish. No, let me finish, please. But each decision was an ODR supported by the cabinet member. If there was something wrong with that, that cabinet member at that time had the opportunity to say no. And obviously, that cabinet member didn't say no, stop it. November's a wrong time to do it. That's an administration decision, not an officer decision, in my view. And it didn't. So that is why we ended up with the two bags. Here, it may well be that something did go wrong, as you say, with the procurement, but as soon as, with a cabinet, you know I don't like cabinets, I prefer a committee system, but with a cabinet the buck does stop with the cabinet member who in the end signs off a decision. It may be made by an officer, but it's got to be done in consultation then with a cabinet member. And if the cabinet member says no, in my view, if you're running a cabinet, it doesn't happen. But that depends on the strength of the leader of the cabinet. I'll bring you back in a moment. So I'm going to bring Councillor Reid, who I promised some time ago she could speak, and she sat there very quietly, so you can go, Pat.
Thank you, Chair. But Councillor Baggett has actually stolen my thunder. I was going to say that I was on the Waste Management Working Group. We talked about the type of bags that, to use. We talked about consulting other councils to ask them about the bags they were using, and so we could do comparisons. Brentwood was mentioned quite a lot. They, for example, use a very sturdy, extremely secure type of bag that works very well for the residents there. So basically the question was, how did we end up with the bags we currently use, which we all know, as Councillor Baggett has said as well, are not fit for purpose. They just blow around in the wind, emptying the contents all over the place.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councillor Reid. You brought a memory back to me, because when we had the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee, I first set up the Waste Working Group. And the very last meeting we had, having set up the trial on Note Bridge, I recall, I think it was Mr Hendry did come in with one bag as an option to look at. And I think it was that was my last meeting on that working group, I think it was, because I disappeared for a year. But I remember the one bag. So then perhaps there was a choice there. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. All I have to say is I've learned something tonight. Learned something that wasn't in this report about why it is we ended up with the bags. And I'm not trying to play the blame game. Part of the reason we have a successful airline industry is because there was a rule taken not to blame anyone, but to find out and learn from mistakes. But learning from mistakes requires transparency. And I've read through this because I came prepared for this question about learning from this mistake. And I read it a few times. I read it forensically, and I looked and I couldn't. I mean, if we all died and they'd uncovered this in the smouldering wreck sometime, and someone looked at this to try and piece together the history of Basildon, they would have no clue that the cabinet member had said that the wrong bags were ordered from this report. And I just wondered, in the spirit of transparency and learning, how it is that this report reflects the fact that we had bags flying around Basildon. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Mr Hendry, did you want to come back on that?
I think, Chairman, I'm glad that the matter is raised, and I'm glad we can have this conversation. The report as written details with the facts as procedurally that I can report through a council report of this nature. So, no, I think that you're right to raise those points. You're right to have the discussion. But what I wouldn't do as part of a formal report such as this would be to bring in, outside reports and things. This is factually on how we reached the decisions that were there. So this isn't an inquest. This is talking about what happened to get us to the decisions that were made. So it wouldn't necessarily bring in things that were said outside of formal meetings.
Councillor Barnes.
Thank you, Chairman. I have got some questions for the officer, if that's all right. Just wanted to touch. You mentioned the fact that the bags used on the trial was 7 times the cost of the bags that were eventually procured. What was the reasoning? The first question would be: what if something costs 7 times as much as what is deployed? Then arguably, the trial itself is flawed. So what was the rationale behind that, and who made the decision to sort of press ahead with that? Looking at the report, sort of page 18. Paragraph 5, you mentioned that the trial service was rated 3.44 out of 5 stars. So I'm just curious to know what steps were taken to address those concerns at that point. And one of the bullet points there says hazard for foot and car traffic collections are slower and from each property. Does that have any link to the overspend that has been mentioned in this meeting tonight? If I can take you through, please, to page 19, paragraph 5 again. You mentioned a revised specification for containers was drafted and prepared. Can I ask who produced that specification? And taking you, I'll give you a chance. Have you caught up? You're right, yeah, yeah. The final paragraph on page 19, going into page 20, it mentions that the council specified a 60% weighting for price and a 40% weighting for quality. And then that was changed to an 80% weighting for price and a 20% weighting for quality. Can I ask why that was, please? Paragraph 4 mentions that the preferred supplier had the shortest lead time, which is something in my experience you generally avoid. So I was just curious to know why the decision was made to go for the supplier with the shortest lead time rather than the other factors being taken into account. And were the manufacturing processes at any point checked, or were the first time the product was seen, sort of when it was delivered? And finally, and I appreciate the Chairman's indulgence on this, the final paragraph of the report before the corporate plan section says all SACs previously provided have met the required specifications and quality requirements. Which quality requirement is that? Is that the original one, or is it the revised one specifying a 60% weighting, or is it the one specifying an 80% weighting on price? Thank you.
Mr Hendry, you wish to respond to those?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. So the indicative costs that I outlined earlier are obviously not straying into the realms of betraying any commercial sensitivities. I've used a figure of around 7 times more. That is based on volume and the proprietary technology which I've referred to previously of that single supplier. Now, obviously, when we go to the market, as I've spoken about in some of my previous answers, without a good reason to go to a direct award, you would have a competitive tender process of some kind, whether through a framework or through an open market. Obviously, this was through a framework. You would need to draft the specification in a way which would not seem to be favouring one supplier over another unduly. Obviously, that would be in breach of the PCR regs, which I've spoken to about before. The difference between the trial spec and the further spec was the revised spec was based on feedback from the trial, from residents, based on from the collection crews as well, and from conversations with other local authorities. So some of the key changes that were put in place in that specification was an increase in the weight of the base of those bags as well. So that was increased from the trial to the final specification. They were also reduced in size slightly. The bags which we have procured are being used by the same supplier in various authorities up and down the country, including some in Welsh Valleys. So they are being used up and down the country. And an additional handle was added to the base of the bag to aid collection crews with emptying. But again, that revised specification comes back to something that could be delivered through the framework which we procured against. The matter of the shortest lead time, obviously the shortest lead time, it was not chosen and awarded on the basis of the shortest lead time. That helped to score in terms of the quality submission because it could meet the lead times of the wider service changes which were going on. Obviously there were two key service changes at the same time, one of those being around the residual waste, so it is making sure that we were delivering those and they weren't sitting on residents' driveways for too long, so there was a fixed point at which the distribution and purchase of the wheel bins was going to take longer, so we needed to wrap around that to make sure that all the containers were in place for the date when the vehicles were in place, for the date that the crews are in place, so we wouldn't have different services starting on different days, which imagine communicating that with our residents would have been very challenging, but it was all built around the ensuring that the containers could be there to be used for the start date of the revised service. There wasn't much leeway in that, and I think some of the other service providers would have come very close to that and not allowed for any slack in that process. So obviously as part of this we did want to make sure we had enough containers to be able to distribute them in a timely manner alongside the residual waste wheelie bins to enable the service to start on November 27th last year. Was the procedure checked? We did undertake quality checks and inspections, and as highlighted in the report, the containers as delivered did meet the specifications and the requirement of the spec as written. You spoke about some of this split between quality and price as well, and I think just to clarify, the 60-40 split was Basildon's one for evaluating the submissions from the framework. The 80-20 price split is the gate to get onto the framework in the first place. So in order to get onto the procurement framework, that's the split that they are using to get to that point. We are using a 60-40 split on our own evaluation. So there is any supplier can apply to get onto the framework. They are asking for 80-20 price and quality to get onto the framework in the first place. Then we are using 60-40 after that point. So hopefully that explains the difference between the two evaluation numbers. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Mr Hendry. From Councillor Barnes's questions, it's raised another one from me. I'm sorry about this. Having read through this again, just looking at the things that Councillor Barnes has raised and what's occurred, the different procurements, the dates involved with the cabinet member, etc., and what was said earlier that the November change of service wasn't a good time to do it. Who decided to stick to November 2023? Because it all seems to be something went wrong. This is the appearance that something wasn't working out properly, but we're stuck with the date of doing it by November 2023. And in doing it that way, and Councillor Barnes mentioned the shortest lead time for the preferred supplier, etc., etc. And without apportioning blame to anybody, it seems to me that this wasn't the best procurement exercise this council's ever done. I may be wrong. That's the appearance I'm getting from what's here. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not blaming anybody, but it appears to me, and I'm speaking just for myself, that there was an opportunity there to get it back on road when the ODRs were, or the cabinet member was consulted with relevant ODRs. Right, that's killed it, hasn't it? Councillor Smith, no, this is going to kill it.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. I do want to pick up on some points, but before I do, I want to help Councillor Barnes with his question, because I've done some FOIs into the costing. There was a £125 fee for the cost of delivering the black wheelie bin with the 2 recycling bags inside, and I think, if I'm wrong, Mr Chairman, to Councillor Mr James Hendry, there was a roll of green food bags, and the contractors just put all of those things in the black wheelie bin and wheeled it up to each house. So I think that's why I'm not defending them, but I think that's why they was hell bent on this date. They've got the black wheelie bins, and unlike the bags which were all in compressed bales, I think this, I'm not defending, but I think that was their rationale for hurrying it along. And also, you could spend £125 one time delivering the black wheelie bins, and then another £125 dropping off the sack. So that could be their rationale. Now, we all like to try and be fair, and it was good these sacks weren't made in the EU, as a Brexiteer speaking, but I discovered they were made in India. And I've got no problem with that. Commonwealth country, lovely to do business with them. But when I looked at the cost, it was about £1.39, £1.29.49, that price mark for each recyclable bag. Now, if they're made in a regular factory in India, no problem. But I couldn't ascertain if they was made in a sweatshop or not. Now, moving forward, what safeguards are we going to put in place to make sure it's made in a factory that's ethical and there's no child labour, it's not a sweatshop? Because, look, it's great to give work across the world, but I would not want anyone to suffer. I genuinely don't know what the situation is. I can see the legal officer speaking, but I want to flag that concern, because I wouldn't want this council being on a panorama documentary if we have slipped up or the supplier has slipped up. I speak from ignorance, and I'm asking a question when I say that. And just to wrap up while the officers come and find an answer for that, I want to stand by Councillor Brown's point about them pathogen bags. When you represent Kingswood, you do meet a lot of doctors for some reason, and I said, when them bags were dropped off, I said, you deal with people who've had chemotherapy, and he goes, yeah. Should they be handling those bags? No. The bin? Well, that's different, but those bags you cannot scrub clean. You've got Velcros, and you've got that bacteria just building up. And there's so many adverts now have your wheelie bin clean. So if someone's not in good health, they can pay £2 and have their wheelie bin jetted clean, it's fresh. But you can't with those bags. So whatever their replacement is, subject to the consultation, they have to be able to be kept clean, their replacement, because we've got to look after the public health. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Councillor, Mr. Hendry.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a point I just need to make clear is that the suppliers that we use do go through, as part of the Council's terms and conditions, there are things in there against slavery and safeguarding, and the framework itself does have those checks in place prior to any suppliers going onto the framework. So I think it's important to make those things clear now, so that just in case our suppliers are listening to this meeting or the word gets back to them, that there is no allegation that is. No, I know, but we do those checks prior to engaging with any supplier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hendry. I'm going to bring Councillor McGurran in now, probably the last speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Interesting discussion again tonight. Councillor Baggett said something that I'd just like to highlight. He said that no one supported the introduction of sacks that blew away in the wind. Well, that isn't entirely the case, is it? Because for months and months and months, Councillor Baggett, the then leader of the Conservative administration, and his cabinet member for environment, Councillor Blake, were saying exactly that. They were saying they'd introduced a new system that was brilliant. It was working and people loved it. And it's only when the residents of Basildon in numbers started donning smocks and taking up pitchforks that they re-evaluated the situation. Round about that time, funnily enough, Councillor Blake then discovered a terrible mistake had been made in the procurement process, nothing to do with ImGov, obviously, but some junior member of staff, which Councillor Baggett was at pains tonight not to put any blame on, whilst pointing the finger firmly in that direction. It seems a bizarre, but yet strangely prescient PR move of the last administration to think their way out of introducing the worst waste collection system in living memory was to go, someone ordered the wrong sacks. Wasn't us, but someone ordered it. Right? What we've heard tonight is even more shocking than that. I mean, that's shocking, but not all that surprising. What is even more shocking is the admission that in the trial that was introduced in order to work out whether the new system would work or not, bags were used that were 7 times more expensive than those that were actually used for the whole borough. 7 times more expensive. And at no point did the cabinet member or the leader presumably challenge that decision. That was actually your decision. At no point did you admit that had happened. You just carried on regardless. The whole consultation process was a farce. If we look at the report today, the focus previously has been on the black bins and the fact that the consultation, that the administration ignored the overwhelming voice of the residents of Basildon on that. But they ignored the overwhelming voice of the residents on almost every aspect of the consultation. They had their own idea, God knows why, and they went with it. And we've all seen the consequences. Our estates reduced to looking like something from a third world disaster movie, quite frankly, and we've all had to cope with that. But at no point, you know. So on the one hand, you're saying it was down to an administrative error, but as Councillor Harrison said, the buck stops with the cabinet member, and I'm now the cabinet member, and the buck will stop with me. But I will not be pointing the finger at council officers, junior or otherwise. I will ensure we get it right, because you have so singularly failed and got it so badly wrong. I mean, it's refreshing in a way, because your administration is noted for doing nothing. The one thing you did, you screwed up monumentally, and we're paying the consequences now. But as has been said, a consultation is going on. We've had over 6,000 responses already, and we're only just over halfway through. We will listen to those responses. We will hear what the residents have to say. We've got a pretty good idea what they've got to say because they've been pretty vocal about it. And we will introduce a system that works. But I have to say, I am somewhat appalled by some of what has been said by the Conservative leader tonight. And we've heard what the report says. We've heard what the Conservative leader says. I think we know which one we can kind of trust more.
Thank you, Councillor McGowan. I'll bring Councillor Baggott in to respond, and then I've got Councillor Callaghan, and that will be the end.
I might have to respond after Councillor Callaghan's spoken, because this has become very much an appendix to the Cabinet as opposed to a scrutiny meeting this evening. And it's interesting they feel they've got to come and try and justify their position so much for the position that they're in. But Councillor McGowan surprises me, because at no point did I make any accusations of officers. If we're at a meeting and we are told by officers, when asked the question, why has this got to go to re-procurement? And the answer from officers is, unfortunately, we had a junior officer that actually filed this too late and that's caused us to do it. If that's what we're told, that's a fact. It's not blaming, it's not actually pointing the finger, it's a fact. The difference is, unlike the bullying culture that you engender within the council, where you bully officers to get what you want to do, and you micromanage everything to the nth degree, and have a leader that's taken over the boardroom to actually sit in amongst officers
Excuse me, Chairman.
to control them at every single level.
I was giving you the opportunity to respond, and I thought it was about the response was to be about the £7 charge for the bag. I thought.
And you were hoping, because that wasn't going to be the case.
Excuse me, Chairman. Could I just politely remind members of the member code of conduct and how they should address one another?
Who was that addressed to?
Councillor, can you turn your mic off for a moment?
Sorry, I'd just like to remind all members, please, of the code of conduct and how they should be addressing one another.
Thank you. Totally agree. Do you any further comment?
Yep. So I will conclude by saying that we can only act as any responsible administration would to the information received from professional officers, and we make the decisions based upon that. It was unfortunate. What would have been more unfortunate is if we'd have then done a witch hunt or actually said that officers were going to be sacked or anything else. I believe that officers can make mistakes, and it's what you learn from those to ensure that those mistakes aren't repeated. In this particular case, it was an error which caused a re-procurement which has taken them down this path. And that's just a fact. It's not a blame or anything else. It's just a plain fact. A mistake was made. It was an officer mistake because officers have a job to do, and that means they are liable to make mistakes in the same way as politicians like to take all the credit for the things that officers do when they want to get in the paper, and we're all like that. But officers actually do the hard work. They also make mistakes as part of doing that hard work, and that's a fact.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. Thank you for that, accepting there was a mistake. But I'll still reiterate that an ODR to carry it out is in consultation with a Cabinet member. The Cabinet member, if it had been you, I'm sure you would have carried out responsibility and said, OK, yes, an officer made a mistake. I had the opportunity to correct it by not agreeing with the ODR and put him back from November 23rd to a sensible date. And that's where I think it appears to me the error has occurred. Councillor Callaghan, I did ask him to indicate he wishes to speak earlier. If he does, he can, but please don't drag us into areas where the code of conduct might be affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say I live rent-free in Councillor Baggott's head, but I won't. In terms of why Cabinet members are here, we are committed to being accessible to all 42 members of the Council. We are here to answer questions. We're on top of our briefs, unlike the previous administration. And I have said to all of the Cabinet members that I want Cabinet members to be leading on answering questions and on introducing their reports at Cabinet. And that is why we're here. We are the ones who are accountable to the public, not the officers. And therefore, I think it is bemusing, really, to have committees moaning that Cabinet members are turning up to answer questions about their portfolio for which they are accountable. So I just wanted to place that on the record. I think in conclusion to this report tonight, Mr Chairman, we have learnt 5 key things about the decision and of what I think we need to understand. The first thing that we have learnt tonight is that the trial was botched and it did not go according to plan. The second thing that we have learned tonight from this report is that the consultation was then ignored and the residents' responses were not taken into consideration. The third thing we have learned is that the blame is apparently to be put on a junior member of staff. So even though, as you have correctly pointed out, Mr Chairman, an ODR has to be done in consultation with a cabinet member, we have learnt tonight from the previous leader of the council that an officer can make a mistake, but there is no apology from a councillor for a decision that he has taken at that time, or from a former leader of the council. The fourth thing that we have learned, and Councillor Brown has alluded to this, through omission really, from both the report and the discussion, is that the rhetoric that was used ahead of the election, that new bags had been ordered, that there was an alternative coming, that the Conservative Party were on it, there is absolutely no evidence that that was true. So there was no evidence whatsoever that they had seen the error of their ways and that they were either ordering new bags or they had commissioned new bags to come forward. So that myth that they perpetuated, it's clear that there was no direction given to officers to do that, and there is nothing in these reports that tell us that new bags were on order and therefore a new administration had to stop them. And the fifth thing that we know is that this entire sorry episode is now costing the council £1.2 million in overspend in this area across the entire waste system. So across those 5 things that we've learnt tonight, I hope that what we can do, and I commend the Commission for scrutinising this, we now need to draw a line under this in 2 weeks' time when the consultation is over into what the future of this service looks like, and then we need to focus on the future. And we need to stop dragging officers through the mud. We need to take accountability for councillors making decisions. We need to take accountability for that. And we need to look to the future and we need to deliver a service that our residents desperately want. And I would finally just say, Mr Chairman, and put on record a huge thank you to all of our refuse staff, because they are out on the front line every single day. They have had to deal. This wasn't their choice to come up with this nonsense system. That was the previous cabinet's choice. But they have gone about their business every single day and they've acted incredibly professionally. They've done this council a great service, and I want to record our thanks to them.
I'm fair-minded, so Councillor Baggott, if you wish to respond, you will be the last speaker. I think the points Councillor Callaghan has made may be valid. You've got the chance to respond to those. Some are valid, I think. But I think it's important, and I'll point out now, while people are still listening perhaps, that it's my intention to pre-scrutinise on the 29th of October the Cabinet report, which is going to Cabinet on the 11th of November on the waste proposals following the consultation. So we'll pre-scrutinise that in 29th of October. Councillor Baggott.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, the conclusions that Councillor Callaghan draws are his conclusions, and he's quite entitled to draw whatever conclusions he wants. They don't have to be the correct ones, they just have to be conclusions that he draws. I would agree with him. I think that the refuse collectors do an absolutely sterling job, and in fact I was down there at 5:30 in the morning to actually speak to them through this process and get their feelings, what was going right, what was going wrong, and to actually hear the feedback from them. But I would remind him that this waste strategy was not just something that was dreamt up by the previous administration. It was on the back of legislation, requirements that were being put down from government, and had been put together in conjunction with an all-party working group, which his members were part of, to actually form and actually come up with the methodology and the way forward. And it got cross-party support initially with regard to how the recyclables were going to be split. The split was then driven by legislation, so it wasn't just something that the Conservative administration just dreamt up one evening. It was being led by legislation. And with regard his point, which was a bit spurious when it comes to the issue, he raised an issue which wasn't even part of the scope of this, because the scope of this was to do with the process and the procurement and what had happened with the procurement of the black sacks. It wasn't to do with other things, which if he'd have actually been so interested in, he could have actually asked the Scrutiny Committee to have a look at and discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baggott. Can I just say from this, I think there are lessons to be learned. I would hope that in the future, if there is some division between officers and cabinet members, it will be out in the open. And I think it's quite important where the buck stops. But in my view, with a cabinet, it stops with the cabinet member every time. Because I believe it even stopped with a chairman of a committee when we had a committee system. And that was the way I operated, as Mr Hendry probably knows, when I was chairman of a Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee. I take the blame if something goes wrong. And that should happen with a cabinet system as well. I think it looks like it didn't quite work out how people wanted. We've got to make sure it doesn't happen again, because Joe Public out there was, and probably still is, totally dissatisfied with the way their recycling is collected. They want it to be collected, there's no doubt about that, but they want it to be collected in a good way where there's not a lot left on the streets. It's easy to use, bags that are easy to use. And the other thing, I'll make the point, and I made it when I was chairman of the Waste Working Group, a lot of the problems still seem to be around the areas which we called the 15%, where it was different roads, different buildings, etc., etc. And I'll say this to Councillor McGurran, that 15% is one which has to be collected different to the normal way of collecting. And that's something this council must get right, not only now but in the future, because they're the people who need the collection in a different way so that waste is collected properly. Can I thank members for their contribution to that? I think it's very worthwhile. Right, I'll move now to the work programme. The work programme is there. I'd like to add from the Cabinet forward plan 2 items to pre-scrutinise. One, as I said, is the item on the 11th of November, going to Cabinet on the 11th of November on the waste. And the second one to pre-scrutinise is the transfer of control of the Basildon Town Centre management. To add those two to the 29th of October. Mr Hendry.
Chairman, something we'll need to work on is obviously it's a tight turnaround between that the closure of the consultation. It might be that the results are presented on the night, or there might be some. I'm not sure kind of the best way of doing that, but I will work with you as part of that to get the best information through the scrutiny process. But it might need to be tied into that process. So.
I'm sure on that particular one that even if it's Councillor McGurran coming to this ONS Commission and saying this is what we're doing, Gov, I'm sure it'll work. I'm sure it would work, Aidan.
I've already announced it.
Sorry. They're the 2 items I'd like to add from the forward plan. Another one I would like to add, and we can programme it in at some time, is to scrutinise the development opportunities of SEMPRA to date, together with land holdings, finances, numbers, types of homes built to date and planned up until April 2026, together with invitation to SEMPRA to attend the ONS Commission. And to formally do it so that the Commission members will have a report and we can have a list of questions in advance to give to SEMPRA for answers, so they know we're not setting them up. Okay? Is that fair? If everyone's happy with that. And the other one, and this comes about because I've had members coming to me about community buildings and community associations and the different types of leases they appear to have. And I have mentioned this to Mr Taylor, to scrutinise the lease arrangements with community association buildings that are within the council's remit, because I think it's something, because I know we go back, and I'm sure members will know, where there was some work to try and standardise leases across our community buildings. And I think we should be scrutinising what's happening with them. I think that may come under Councillor Ferguson's as a cabinet member, I'm not sure. Yes, yeah, come in.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for raising the issues to be on the work programme. If it's okay, I completely take on board the points that you're raising. If myself and Mr. Taylor could just discuss the terms of reference of that to come back to this to the work programme to allow that in the timescales that you're. If myself and Mr. Taylor could just work through the kind of terms of reference of what we would be able to report on.
Absolutely, that's why it's wide open, because we can then work on what the terms of reference will be at the right time. Because there was one other one which follows on from a meeting last night Scrutiny had with the Chief Executive, and we're looking at, and I'm going to ask officers to look at a sensible way of getting this onto ONS, is to look at the way we deal with temporary accommodation. I know that someone's looking at already, so we can get that on the agenda at the on the work programme at the appropriate time. Councillor Callaghan.
Yeah, just on that, Chair, there is a report going to Cabinet on TA next week as well. So there's a policy that's going out for consultation that you might want to look at as well.
Okay, okay, that's something we can, I think, work on together, because the problem with the forward planning for the Cabinet forward plan, there was nothing I could pick on, which I did look at that one, because it takes place on the in October before our next meeting, and I didn't particularly want to call another extra meeting of the ONS Commission, because it sets up officers a lot more time to produce reports. So we can pick that one up at the appropriate time, because I think it's something that Scrutiny needs to look at. I hope you'll agree. Anybody else, anything for the work programme? No? Right. Thank you very much. A very good meeting. Safe journeys home. Thank you.